Hi, my name is Greg Warren, and I want to talk today about Mike Matlock, more affectionately known as Mad Dog or simply the Dog. Uh, if you were involved with wrestling in the St. Louis area during the 1980s, you knew the Dog. He was just a fixture. Predominantly, he was a referee, a freestyle referee. That was where his passion was. FILA, that was the governing body of wrestling back then, and the Dog was very proud to be part of FILA, so proud that probably 30, 40 times a day he would simply just say, FILA! FILA knows! FILA knows! I first met the Dog. He was one of the coaches for our Missouri freestyle team that was going to the junior nationals. And the Dog was in charge of evening runs. He would take us out on a run, and we all had to run behind him. And the Dog was slow. He was extremely slow. But if you thought you wanted to run a little faster and get ahead of the Dog, he would just turn off into some alley or back street, and you'd turn around and everybody was gone. And the dog loved doing that to people. When I was a senior in high school, my father was the head coach at my high school, and we needed an assistant coach. And I said, hire the Dog. I mean, the Dog, he knows a lot about wrestling. Instantly, the Dog is one of the most colorful characters I've met in life. It's a very, very colorful character. But I think sometimes because he was so colorful, it gets lost that he was also a really good coach. The Dog knew his technique, and he was passionate about certain things. Get off your knees. That was a big one. When you were resting, so let's say you were going top bottom out, and it was one guy's turn to be out, you were not allowed to sit down. Rest on your feet. Rest on your feet. Walk around. Rest on your feet. And that really got ingrained in me. When I got tired a lot in college wrestling, and I tried not to rest on the bottom. I'd get to my feet, and that's where I would stall. And speaking of stalling, the Dog would wrestle with us. I don't know. I think the Dog must have been late 30s, maybe 40 when I was in high school, and he would wrestle with us every day. He would wrestle in full plastics with a singlet over the plastics, and he would always have a mouthpiece in, an old mouthpiece, and the Dog would stall. He would just stall, but he had a really good front headlock. He had this front headlock that he learned from Dave Schultz, and he could choke you out with it. I don't think he ever choked me out, but he almost did. He'd zap it on, and you just couldn't get out of it. And I was pretty good at that time when I was a senior in high school. I was pretty good, and I would shoot in on the Dog, and he would zap that headlock on me, and my dad would just get so mad at me. Get out of that headlock, Gregory. Get out of it. It's too tight, Jerry. It's too tight. He can't get out of it. It's too tight, Jerry. It's too tight. Now, the Dog had a ton of sayings, and to be really honest, I only spent a few years of my life around the Dog, and the sayings are still there, and I'm sure there's people all over the country that know these things. But the Dog, one, breakfast causes cancer. Two, this is his weight loss advice. Drink soup. It fools your stomach. I wrote a couple of these down. Well, FILA knows, of course. He would always say, because of wrestling, I can go anywhere in the world and get a hot meal and a place to stay. And I'm very certain that the Dog could. The Dog would go with us when we went out to eat after a match to a pizza place, and he'd always order pizza with no cheese. No cheese! No cheese on the pizza! No cheese! I think he had some sort of dairy intolerance. But if you have a dairy intolerance, why are you ordering pizza? But the Dog liked pizza with no cheese. This is one of my favorite Dog stories. And I wasn't there for this, but I heard it from several reliable sources. Dog was reffing in Cedar Falls, Iowa, at the Junior Nationals. And there was a controversial match. I'm sure the Dog didn't think it was controversial, but he made a call and it went against some woman's son. So after the match, the woman comes out of the stands and she is just giving it to the dog, just yelling at him. And the dog listens. And at some point he goes, "Lady, I drove all the way from St. Louis, Missouri to Cedar Falls, Iowa, just so I could screw your son out of that match." So actually, I'm remembering now the dog drove me to one of my recruiting trips. When I went to Notre Dame, my dad couldn't go, and he was like, "Here, just have the dog take you." He gave the dog our station wagon, and we drove up there. I know the dog has been a mentor to a lot of young referees. One of my friends, Steve Finley, he was a teammate of mine, and the dog thought he would make a good ref, and he took him up to some tournaments, introduced him to all his friends. The dog, I kind of lost touch with him after high school. The dog he was a wanderer. The dog was from St. Louis, I know that, but he spent a lot of time coaching with Charlie Sheritz in Columbus, Nebraska. They had very, very successful teams. And then I ran into him when I was in Houston. I did a little bit of coaching after college, and we went to a tournament in New Orleans, and the dog was part of the New Orleans wrestling scene. And so I know he's part of that scene. And then I know he wound up in North Carolina. And he was, I've had a lot of people reach out and say how much they loved him in North Carolina. The dog died a couple weeks ago. And like I said, I lost track of the dog. He wasn't a big part of my adult life. But when I heard about this, I got very emotional. And I was like, man, he really had an impact on me. And just in very small ways, but it stayed with me. And I just think about how, he really did give his life to wrestling. The dog, he made a lot of people better wrestlers, and I think he made them more interesting human beings. The dog, he made us love wrestling. He made us think that we were part of something much bigger, something very special. And, I'm very lucky to have known the dog.